At the beginning of 2020, what we've really seen is the atomization of international society. Institutions have been marginalized. Neither balance of power nor a rules-based order have been ordering principles for international affairs. There's been a sense of strategic self-determination. In the 1960s and 70s, it was all about political self-determination, where countries decided to become independent and were able to be sovereign over their own domestic politics. But now a number of countries around the world are expressing their strategic personality in a very national way, which means that there's a lot of chaos in the international system. In one sense, the United States still remains, as it were, the geopolitical swing player. That is, if it decides to engage, its engagement can be pretty dispositive of the case, and if it decides to withdraw, it leaves a vacuum that is pretty important that no one can automatically fill. So it's still a geopolitical swing player. We saw what happened when they decided to restore deterrence in the Middle East by the targeted killing of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Al-Quds force, whose machine that he built in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen was really what was changing the effective balance of power in the Middle East. Now that's been a little bit stalled, and Iran is now thinking of coming back into discussions to de-escalate, and perhaps the Europeans and the Americans will now find a new modus vivendi for Iran. So it made a difference what the United States makes. The question really is can the US be relied upon in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, even in Latin America and Africa, and that is what is being questioned. It's really important for countries in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, to still find ways to engage with the United States to ensure that it can continue to provide a public good of international security, because some of the new players on the block, it's not yet clear that their main goal is to provide a public good of international security as opposed to just defend their economic interests and ensure their own spheres of influence. Well, China, of course, famously wants a multipolar world, but it's campaigning for a unipolar Asia. It wants, as many countries in Asia, to pay it the respect, give it the tribute that a century and a half of humiliation had denied China. So a lot of its foreign policy about the restoration of national pride. The really dramatic thing of the Belt and Road Initiative is the digital Silk Road, is the way in which China is trying to build smart cities, fiber optic cables, 5G, e-commerce, with the countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and the data that China will gather from that will make it a data superpower. India needs to express its strategic personality more in the Indo-Pacific. It's interesting that ASEAN states have now accepted the appellation of the Indo-Pacific rather than Asia-Pacific. And so there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for India to become a little bit of more of a shaper, a stronger defender of the rules-based order from which it has benefited. And countries in Southeast Asia and the rest of the Indo-Pacific, I think, will welcome an extrovert strategic India in their region. Of course, I mean, domestic politics have absorbed a great deal of Indian political attention. There are challenges and questions about constitutional issues and the like. But overall, India is still perceived as the world's largest democracy, a country that is very diverse and needs to respect different points of views, but is at a moment in its own economic development where the political personality needs to align a little bit more closely with the economic power that it's wielding. And it can do that comfortably within the G20 environment. And I think that is where we will see India developing more of a foreign policy approach. All I can say is that in Europe and in North America, people look to India to play a larger role. So it will be received in the international marketplace of foreign policy very warmly. We are at the cusp of a technological Cold War. You have the United States that still wants to defend its big ICT giants and a free and open internet. You have Russia wanting to create an internal intranet of its own. You have China focusing on internal security and its great firewall. All this will be played out in the 5G debate. And the important question about 5G is, will we be able to accommodate different suppliers in the 5G environment? Or are we going to create a situation where China will have its 5G, the Europeans will have its own, the Americans will, perhaps in a delayed fashion, enter the 5G universe? Because if that happens, then we move from an internet to a splinternet. And the global economy really depends on a global internet, on the global sharing of data in order to ensure that financial transactions and an awful lot of other healthy things happen.